Hello and welcome to Roundtable. Who is the latest space invader? Well, it looks like it's the world's richest man, Elon Musk, who's said to be crowding out the competition and writing the rules for the space economy. That's the fear, at least, of the European Space Agency as Musk takes on his rival billionaires. Last year, his company sent, on average, 3 satellites into orbit every day. Who will dominate space? Great to have you along. I'm David Foster. According to the European Space Agency, half of the satellites in space belong to one company, Elon Musk's Starlink. And rather than encouraging and promoting its own champions, Europe is aiding and facilitating Musk. The warning comes from Josef Asbacher, the head of the European Space Agency, in an interview with the Financial Times. Well, many other space companies are also aiming to send thousands of satellites to what is called low Earth orbit, LEO, to deliver commercial services such as Earth observation and internet services. It's getting rather crowded up there. Low Earth orbit is up to 2,000 kilometers above the Earth, where most new commercial services are targeted. Elon Musk says SpaceX, his private rocket company, was prepared to spend up to $30 billion to expand Starlink. SpaceX was launching more than 100 satellites every month, with close to 2,000 currently in low Earth orbit. The Satellite Industry Association estimates there could well be more than 100,000 commercial spacecraft in orbit by 2029. Let us now hear from the head of the European Space Agency Space Safety Program about why they're so concerned that Mr. Musk is writing space rules. Joining us from Darmstadt in Germany, we have Holger Krag, head of the European Space Agency Space Safety Program. Welcome to you. Alabama in the United States, and Svetla Ben-Itzhak. She's the assistant professor of space and international relations at the US Space Force Air University, and to Vancouver in Canada, Michael Byers joins us from there, co-director of the Outer Space Institute. Great to see you. Holger, let me come to you first of all. 3 satellites a day on average last year for Elon Musk and his Starlink team. It doesn't sound very safe out there.
Look, the altitude that are used currently by the Starlink satellites is very low. So whenever a satellite gets stranded in this altitude, atmosphere will make sure that they vanish from space automatically. So that's a good thing. Of course, a challenge is the sheer amount of satellites. These satellites are sharing space also with many other missions, and there it can happen from time to time that a collision warning is raised between one of the Starlink satellites and one of the other satellites, and that requires coordination. You would call it space traffic management today, and here we find that we are missing a lot of technology and also flight rules to implement the space traffic management.
Isn't it a little bit like having air traffic control that is operated on a private basis? There's no international coordination, and the chances of an accident, of something going wrong, are pretty high.
Yeah, there's a reflex that we compare space traffic to air traffic, but it's completely different. In space, 90% of the objects that we know, they don't have a pilot, because they're no longer functional. They're pieces of debris and they don't follow any rule. Secondly, in space, you travel around the whole globe within 90 minutes and you cross dozens of countries within 1 hour. So, having a delocalized way of managing space traffic like it's done in air traffic, that doesn't work. Still, there's room for privates. I'm pretty sure that we can start out with technology databases, coordination databases offered by private entities. Why not? And I think that could be even the first move.
Okay, well, let's hear a little bit about what Elon Musk himself has to say. Space is just extremely enormous. Satellites very tiny. This isn't some situation where we're effectively blocking others in any way. We've not blocked anyone from doing anything, nor do we expect to. Svetla, they're replying to general criticism about what he's been doing and the speed at which he's doing it. The Chinese are rather upset that there's too much up there and that he's only adding to it on an hourly basis. Do you think any of the criticism is justified?
Yes, a lot of the criticism is justified. However, I would like to point out that it is not a complete chaos out there. We have the International Telecommunication Union that manages the global radio spectrum and the frequency assignments worldwide. So it is true that satellites need to avoid radio frequency interference. And they need to maintain a minimum degree of orbital separations. Also, only a limited number of satellites can occupy a specific orbital path. And there is an increased competition for these resources. However, I must point out that Elon Musk is not the only one planning to launch satellites in space. There are many other companies planning to do so. For example, OneWeb is planning to launch a constellation of 648 satellites, Samsung 4600, Boeing 3000, just to name a few. So overcrowding a LEO, low Earth orbit, may become a serious problem. Currently, there are some estimates point to the fact that we have occupied between a third to a half of the capacity of all the capacity in LEO before overcrowding becomes a serious problem.
We're already at 1/3 to 1/2 of capacity.
Correct. So
and what happens? What happens if you exceed that capacity? Because people will continue to do so.
So the worst case scenario that we won't be able to exit Earth. The Kessler syndrome may kick in full gear. Satellites will crash in each other, and basically LEO will become inoperable, and we won't be able to exit the Earth atmosphere. This is the worst case scenario. There are, however, mitigation techniques in place, and the European ESA is working on several projects on debris mitigations, and NASA as well.
Well, we'll come back.
So there are efforts to mitigate this problem.
I'll come back to Holger on that. But Michael, you've been nodding knowingly. Your title is Outer Space. This is effectively inner space, but I guess there's a crossover because this is low Earth orbit, about 2,000 Ks up. But what were you wondering as you were hearing those descriptions?
Well, I think the key point here is that Elon Musk comes from the Silicon Valley business culture, which is that of moving fast and breaking things. And he is putting thousands of satellites in orbit before national and international regulators can catch up with the challenge. If Elon Musk wasn't doing this, we'd have another 5 or 10 years to develop international rules. But because of his reusable rockets and his flat pack satellites, he's launching 50 satellites at a time, almost once per week. And well, legal system simply hasn't caught up. So the problem is not Elon Musk so much as that national governments and international organizations haven't got their act together yet, and he will cause pressure for them to do so quickly.
Is there any chance that he would listen to people who are telling him, look, slow down a little bit, we're a bit like donkeys and you're the racehorse, we need to catch up with you, and it's going to take some time?
Well, it's interesting because in 2019, the international astronomical community, the people who study stars and planets through telescopes, realized that Elon Musk's satellites were creating light pollution and interfering with their science. And they went to him, and he responded by instructing his engineers to work with the astronomers to reduce the light pollution. And they've actually managed to reduce the light pollution to some degree. Not completely, there's still a problem for telescopes, but it was a good faith effort to try to work with other stakeholders. So Elon Musk is not an evil character here. He is a businessman who has harnessed new technological developments and is seeking to capture a marketplace, and regulators simply have to catch up.
Holger, it was interesting. Oh, yeah, carry on. Yes, Svetla, do.
May I just interject here? Elon Musk is not some rogue actor that can do anything whatever he wants to do. Actually, he's working closely with the federal regulators here in the United States. specifically for his satellites, the Federal Communication Commissions, the FCC, had to approve proposed modifications of the satellites, as well as they had to approve his lowering the LEO Earth orbit of his Starlink satellites to under 570 kilometers. It was lowered from about 1,100 kilometers down to 570, and they approved this. The reasoning, the rationales why switching these orbits were many, including cost effectiveness. The FCC also addressed the concerns of citizens, environmentalist groups, astronomical societies, and so forth. They're actually requesting of Elon Musk and his company to publish a report every 2 years.
Okay, should we ask the European Space Agency
yes, absolutely.
how much it has been kept in the loop on this? Because I've read comments, Holger, where people have said, look, the United States and Elon Musk and other people like that, they just happen to be way ahead of the competition. And it's economic jealousy that is causing the complaints from people like the ESA and others.
Not really. The space to be issue is old, and it's older than the space traffic increase that we see now. And it's not only Elon Musk. It is all players in space, and also the missions paid by taxpayers that we did in the past. The problem is that the amount of objects that we have in space, 30,000 larger than a soccer ball, 1 million larger than a cherry, they're causing a risk today, and there are ways to prevent it. And there are two simple guidelines that everybody has to follow. Vent fuel at the end of the mission to prevent explosions, and then dispose the space system afterwards. However, this is not happening. Despite of having laws, national laws and guidelines, this is not happening. It's happening only to roughly half of the objects. So we have a much too poor for performance in implementing space debris prevention. And if you now increase the space traffic, and whoever is doing it, it doesn't matter, then of course we must be much better than we are today. And here I believe is where ESA and the space agencies can come in. Why doesn't work? This prevention is working only so poorly, and that's partly lack of technology and not only lack of policy. The technology to dispose a mission after 10 years of operations, the technology to prevent explosion is complex. We are developing it, and we would like to try and demonstrate and also put it into practice, coming to a zero debris policy for the missions that we are flying today, because the missions of the past, they have not been clean either. It's not only the new space flight. And one of the flagships we are putting forward is a new service that will actually remove objects from space that have already stranded.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you about that if I have time before the end of the program. How do you go about it? Is it a big magnet? Is it a massive vacuum cleaner? I don't know. Let's have a look at some of the figures. According to Morgan Stanley, the global space industry could generate revenue of more than $1 trillion or more in 2040. That is up from $350 billion currently. So that's a massive, that's trebling it. And yet it won't be the eye-catching space tourism that will be the cash cow. That market will be worth only $8 billion by 2030. Michael, it is things like, if you like, spying, Earth photographing. It is internet circuits up there that the satellites are helping to operate. It isn't the fact that you or I might like to go up. It's that the Earth probably wouldn't be able to survive technologically without what's happening.
Well, yes, and space-based applications are essential to the global economy today and will become more important. They're essential for food production, supporting agriculture with Earth imaging, the knowledge that comes from being able to scrutinize fields on a daily basis to spot insect infestations, for instance. But we can only make use of all these applications if we can coordinate all of the different actors and deal with the tragedies of the commons that would otherwise arise, and space debris is one of them. I've been defending Elon Musk, but I don't think that he needs 40,000 satellites to provide his service, and I would like to see the U.S. government force him to do the same kind of work with only 10,000 satellites or 15,000 satellites. The regulators need to get on top of this in order to make sure that we don't completely congest low Earth orbit and deprive access to it for everyone. There are other problems. Climate change is related here. All these rocket launches are adding to greenhouse gas emissions. And then you have all these satellites that are coming back at the end of their operational lives. And they're burning up into millions of tiny particles, mostly of aluminum, and therefore adding to changes in the upper atmosphere that we don't yet fully understand. So we do need to get on top of this. And Elon Musk is forcing the issue by being the first mover.
Is that a good thing? A good thing that he's doing this?
Well, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing isn't the question. It's happening. He's allowed to do this right now. He's a businessman seeing an opportunity, just like he did with electric cars and with Tesla. And he's changing the world in which we live. And governments tend to move slowly unless they're forced to move fast. And that's what he's doing.
Okay, what about this? This is for you, Svetla, also for you, Holger. But I'm going to quote something from the US Director of National Intelligence. This was last year. The Office of the US Director of National Intelligence saying Beijing is working to match or exceed US capabilities in space to gain the military, economic, and prestige that Washington has accrued from space leadership. Is it anywhere near, also in terms of the civilian influence? Does it have Elon Musk? Does it have the brains in China to match what we're seeing perhaps in Silicon Valley, etc.?
So yes, over the last about 20 years, but it started back in the 1980s and 1970s, federal deregulation in the United States kind of propelled the private commercial space sector. It kind of culminated into the activities that we are seeing with Elon Musk. There have been advances in the commercial space sectors in China as well as in Russia, but not as much. And many of those initiatives are actually sponsored and financed heavily by state funds, as we also see here in the United States. So is China posing a challenge to the United States in the space sector? Well, they're giving a good race to the United States, and this is actually a good thing. This is how we put astronauts to the moon as a result of a competitive race, right? However, based on the state of the global space economy for 2020, which was estimated at about $447 billion, most of which was in the commercial space sector, the US government spending on space for 2020 was about 12% of that versus about 9% of all the other countries combined. So in other words, in 2020, the United States spending on space far exceeded that all of the other countries combined. And this has been the trend for the last 20 years.
Well, let's ask somebody from the European Space Agency. The mammoth is what we see in the United States. The smaller participants, even coming together under the umbrella of the European Space Agency, really aren't worth, as far as the big boys are concerned, taking into account very much.
It's true to some degree, but I think we see a paradigm change worldwide. Space has been a domain of a public-funded spaceflight for a long time. And this is now changing. Space is becoming a marketplace. Space is becoming economic space. And we see this also in Europe. We have auto constellations operated out of Europe, and OneWeb is one example. But we also see many startups in several domains. So it took a bit longer, but there are now big steps made in Europe as well in getting into the commercialization of spaceflight. So that era has begun in Europe as well.
What about the future for the European Space Agency in terms of being dwarfed by these massive national investments from the United States, whether it be private or public, and from China? Is there any area where the ESA believes that it is ahead?
I think what the Space Agency is good at is to look into technologies that are complex and leave the field for the technology that is mature and usable to those that can commercially exploit it. So we need to concentrate at the things that are difficult. And I think a particular strength in Europe is sustainability. And also services that we depend on. We heard before how dependent we are on space infrastructure. 40% of the applications on the mobile phone already today, they depend on services coming from space.
Okay, Michael, if it is a bit like the old Wild West up there, and the one with the biggest six-shooter is the one who eventually wins, and going back to what Svetla said about eventually may become too crowded in low Earth orbit to actually access it properly, and there could be collisions, etc., etc. Doesn't this give somebody like either Elon Musk as an individual or perhaps China the ability to recognize how dependent we here on Earth are for these systems and take advantage of the vulnerability of us if those systems were compromised?
Well, yes, except that everyone depends on space now. So if one country were to start destroying satellites in low Earth orbit, they would create vast amounts of debris, which would then threaten their own satellites and potentially cut off their own access.
You don't have to blow them up with a six-gun. What you could do is just make them inoperable by jamming them, and yet your one remains the one that works and is in control.
Well, you're a very sophisticated military strategist, because that's exactly where countries are going. They're avoiding physical impacts that create debris and working on cyber capabilities to interfere with other satellites or to jam satellites. And that is countered by the launching of thousands of satellites, which makes it impossible to remove an entire system by destabilizing just a few satellites. So yes, there is something of an arms race in space, but it's an arms race that is non-violent, doesn't involve physical impacts because of the mutual vulnerability.
Yeah, which leads me, which leads me, and I am no astrophysicist, I am no great strategic military planner, but it leads me to wonder, Svetla, let me put this one to you, whether the need is immediate for regulation that prevents the kind of cataclysmic intergalactic catastrophe that I've just been referring to as a possibility ever happening.
Well, I don't see, in my opinion, in my research, I don't see Elon Musk or any of the other billionaires racing to space as one of those villains that would just attack all satellites and bring us all down to our knees. There are actually international regulations and space laws, in particular the first 5 treaties written back in the 1960s and 1970s, regulating who can operate in space, who can register an object flying in space. So in particular, Article 6, 7, and 8 of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty give responsibility, liability, and ownership of any object that operates in space to states. So states still remain the main actors in space. And I also agree that there is enough redundancy and kind of mega constellations that one actor cannot just take down all operational satellites out there. So we have contingency plans. In fact, just but to your point,
I've only got a minute left, and I need to get Holger to wrap this one up, if that's okay, because he's from the ESA.
Yes, of course.
You alluded to it earlier on, Holger. There's a lot of rubbish up there. How do you clean it up?
Well, for the first time ever, by 2025, we will fly a mission that will take the first piece of space debris down again. It is a 100-kilogram piece. In a high orbit, quite a meaningful piece of debris. And that will be captured by a Swiss startup called ClearSpace. And they developed a vehicle that can remove multiple objects and that can be used in different instances to provide this service also commercially. And we need to do this. We need to do this next to better debris prevention. First, we need to better prevent debris, and the leftovers, they would have to be removed with these kind of capture missions. And the two belong together. And if we demonstrate that it works, I think we give a perfect condition also to regulators to take it up and to make it mandatory in future laws.
Extraordinary. Is there an honest, or to take the analogy a stage further, is there an honest sheriff there to bring peace to this town?
Yes, there is the United Nations Committee on Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, but we know getting to international law takes a long time. Last time space law was touched was in the 70s. So I believe technology needs to do the first move. Very often, through very good, accepted, technical, pragmatic solutions, you come to standards, and the standards are accepted, and from accepted standards to come to regulations. So I put my bet on good technology to do the first move.
Listen, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. It has been down to the Jeff Bezoses, the Elon Musks, perhaps even the Richard Bransons of this human world to perhaps show the authorities where to go in this outer space world, or inner space, as it happens to be at the moment. Listen, thank you very, very much indeed. These are fascinating times. I couldn't believe it when I read it was 3 satellites a day, or the equivalent of. Thanks for coming on the program. Thanks for watching it wherever you are, whether you're on this planet or perhaps another one. Out of this world. From me, David Foster, and the Roundtable team. Goodbye.